My husband, Vaughn, was given a second chance at life and reverted to being 17, defending my former high school bully, my first love, in the principal's office. With his arms around her, he dramatically exclaimed, "Call the police! Check the surveillance. This time, I'm going to expose you for who you really are." I turned and opened the door for the police who had already been called. "No need to thank me," I quipped, idiot. 1. In the grimy bathroom of the old school building, Ella hummed a tune as she shoved the burning cigarette, but on my shoulder, while I was washing my hands. "Fiona, listen up. Don't think you can just hang around Vaughn all the time, just because Aunt Grace spoils you. You're just a dog that the Vaughn family has taken pity on. Ella is my mother-in-law, Grace's adopted daughter, and therefore my sister-in-law. She was adopted from an orphanage by my mother-in-law Grace, who she refers to as Aunt Grace. Grace is particularly fond of charity and has helped many disadvantaged children, including me. When I started high school, I was lucky enough to be chosen to give a speech because I had the highest score in the entire school in the middle school entrance exam. Grace, as a school board member, was sitting in the front row and spotted me right away. Grace was so happy that she asked me to tutor her son, Vaughn, who was in my class. I agreed at the time. I thought it was just a normal act of gratitude. But Ella, who had a crush on Vaughn, didn't think so. She started playing pranks on me, slapping me, tearing up my homework, putting razor blades in my desk drawer, sprinkling lime powder in my water cup, and having a few bad boys follow me after school. In the past, I didn't want to embarrass Grace, so I always chose to endure it silently. It wasn't until Grace was on her deathbed that she told me she knew about everything. It turned out that she had been watching me struggle from the very beginning as an observer, and she used it as part of her test to see if I was suitable to be her daughter-in-law. She said she was very satisfied with the result, because I behaved exactly as she expected, loyal, reliable, and very patient. It was no wonder that she forced Vaughn to get engaged to me when I first won the provincial science prize. 2. Can't you speak? Ella suddenly flared up, slapping me across the face. The pain jolted me awake. I suddenly realized that this wasn't a nightmare, but a real life-changing rebirth. Because of this realization, my fingers trembled uncontrollably. Ella tried to grab my hair, but I caught her wrist. "Are you sure no one is going to come in here?" "Of course," Ella smiled triumphantly at me. "I've got people watching both ends of the stairs. Don't expect any teachers to come and save you." "That's great." I twisted her wrist hard, pulling her into the stall with me as she screamed, and pressed her face into the toilet bowl. Ella struggled desperately, but she couldn't do anything to me. Having grown up in the mountains since I was a child, I've done everything from chopping wood to carrying water. I'm definitely stronger than Ella, who has been pampered all her life. I pulled Ella's head out of the water and asked her, "Does the toilet water taste good?" Ella's lips trembled, and her makeup was all smudged. She opened her mouth to scream, but I pressed her down again. This time it lasted longer. When I pulled her up again, Ella was much quieter, no longer shouting, only intermittent sobs. "I'm going to tell the teacher that you bullied me, Fiona. Just wait until you get expelled." "I'd love to see that happen." Grabbing Ella's hair, I dragged her out. "Then go ahead and report me. But remember, Ella, as long as I'm here, you can forget about living a good life. You'll never have peace." These were all the things she had said to me in my previous life. Now I'm giving them all back to her. 3. Ella ran out crying. I knew she was going to go find someone to complain. Compared to a poor Fiona like me, Miss Ella, as a young lady, could easily file a complaint if she wanted to. I ignored her. I returned to the previous cubicle and slammed into the water pipe on the wall with all my might. As a result, I met Vaughn's family much earlier than expected. But the location wasn't at the engagement party. It was in the principal's office. "Look at what you've done to Ella. No matter what the reason, Fiona must be expelled today." Vaughn yelled at the principal. He was holding Ella, who was still trembling, in his arms. Her clothes were all wet, revealing her curves. Mrs. Grace sat there elegantly, her brand-name jewelry sparkling. She didn't say anything, but her presence was already a symbol of power. "Oh, come on, Vaughn, don't jump to conclusions. We don't have all the facts yet, the principal, who usually flattered Mrs. Grace, calmed his emotions and tried to calm the situation. What are you talking about? Vaughn roared again. At that moment, the door opened, and the homeroom teacher carefully helped me in. My left cheek was badly swollen, and my right hand was hanging high in a cast. My collar was torn, revealing several obvious cigarette burn marks. Vaughn was instantly stunned and speechless. Mrs. Grace's face was full of shock as well. As for Ella, she was so surprised she almost jumped out of Vaughn's arms. You? Hello, Aunt Grace. I nodded lightly to Mrs. Grace. I'm so sorry to meet you under these circumstances. What on earth is going on? Mrs. Grace walked quickly towards me, took my hand, and looked at the scars with heartache, saying, Good girl, tell Auntie honestly what happened. I hesitated for a moment before biting my lip and speaking. Seeing this, Mrs. Grace asked more sternly, Hurry up. Then, I pointed at Ella, who was standing there. At that moment, Ella screamed, She's lying. She hit me. Aunt Grace, look, I'm all wet. After school, Ella dragged me to the bathroom and had people block the entrance to prevent anyone else from coming in. Then she started tearing my clothes, burned me with cigarettes, and called me a bitch. I spoke very calmly, but I didn't touch her. As for why her clothes are wet, it's because she broke the faucet when she pushed me. Hearing this, Ella tried to pounce on me to continue arguing. No, it's not. You accidentally broke your arm and then framed me. I didn't refute, but just looked at her pocket, because her clothes were so wet that they were almost transparent. It was easy to see the bright cigarette case and lighter inside. This scene obviously embarrassed Mrs. Grace very much. She immediately walked forward, took the red cigarette case and lighter out of Ella's pocket. When the red cigarette case was thrown on the ground, it was like a loud slap. Dare you lie? Could it be that these burns were deliberately inflicted on yourself by Fiona to frame you? Mrs. Grace slapped Ella mercilessly. Apologize to Fiona immediately. For Mrs. Grace, who always emphasized etiquette and decency, felt that only unreasonable people would resort to violence. But this time, she actually slapped Ella herself, clearly furious. Ella was stunned by the slap. Aunt Grace, you actually hit me for Fiona. She turned around, buried her face in Vaughn's arms, and burst into tears. Vaughn looked up at Mrs. Grace with disappointment in his eyes. Mom, I know you like Fiona, but Ella is family. How can you just believe Fiona and hit Ella? He held Ella and shouted, looking like he was acting in some old-fashioned melodrama. Call the police. Check the surveillance. This time I'm going to show everyone your true colors. As he spoke, Vaughn glared at me with a look full of years of resentment. It was not the look a 17-year-old should have. My heart skipped a beat. After so many years of marriage, no further proof was needed. Just one look was enough. I was also certain that Vaughn had been reborn, just as I wanted. I couldn't help but laugh. Karma is a bitch. The pain Vaughn caused me in my previous life should naturally be repaid by the Vaughn of my previous life. At this moment, there was a knock at the door. Without turning around, I walked past the two miserable figures on the ground and opened the door to greet the police. I've already called the police on my way here. You're welcome, what a fool. 5. The police acted swiftly. As per Vaughn's request, they thoroughly examined all the school's surveillance footage from the past hour and actually found a camera that could capture the bathroom. This camera was usually blocked by the lush leaves of the roadside plane trees in summer, but when the leaves fell in autumn and winter, the window of the girls' bathroom could be captured, although only the window. So it completely recorded Ella pressing the cigarette but against me, but the subsequent fight was not captured. Additionally, because Ella and I are about the same size, and the bathroom floor was covered in water from the broken pipe, the shoe marks were completely unclear. The analysis could only determine that there was a fight there. As for whether it could be determined who was hitting whom, well, anyone with a little knowledge would know that technology today hasn't advanced to that level. However, a cigarette butt found on the bathroom floor revealed Ella's fingerprints and saliva. And the group of delinquent girls that Ella had assigned to watch the stairs were caught on camera there. Those girls didn't have a strong psychological constitution and confessed everything after a few questions from the police. They also revealed a lot of old things Ella had done to bully others. I wasn't the first person Ella had targeted. Basically, any girl who was a little too close to Vaughn had suffered at her hands. There was a girl in Vaughn's class who was actually very shy and introverted. She was bullied badly by some thugs that Ella had found because Vaughn had made a few jokes about her developing early. She tried to commit suicide several times and is still at home on sick leave due to psychological problems. Ella couldn't accept this result and pushed through the crowd, repeatedly watching the footage on the screen. How could this be? How could it be such a coincidence? You must be in cahoots. The police officer who was pushed away looked unhappy. Little girl, watch your words. We haven't said a word to the reporter since we came in. How could we be in cahoots? Ella was speechless and buried her face in her arms, sobbing loudly. I stood coldly in the crowd watching this farce, feeling like an outsider. I discovered the secret of these cameras when I donated money to renovate the school building as an outstanding graduate in my previous life. At that time, I didn't want to publicize and raise funds for this place full of bad memories. But Ella knew how to make me suffer, and she persuaded Mrs. Grace and the entire Vaughn family to force me to donate. So you see, many things in life are destined. It's not that there is no retribution, it's just that the time has not yet come. 6. Vaughn was completely dumbfounded. In less than an hour, his lifelong first love had shattered before his eyes. And now he was completely broken. Vaughn crouched on the ground, pulling at his hair. How could this happen? How could it turn out like this? It shouldn't be like this. He suddenly looked up and yelled at me with red eyes. Did you do this? You must have done this. What have I done to wrong her? Did I force her to press a cigarette butt on me? I calmly retorted. Vaughn was speechless. In my previous life, I was still his wife, the designated successor of the Vaughn family, and the CEO of Vaughn's company. At that time, I had both power and status, and I was simply the stereotypical vicious female second lead in those romantic novels. Therefore, Vaughn could naturally blame everything on me, never considering whether it was fair to do so. If Ella was unfortunate, it must be my fault, because I was such a cruel and ruthless woman. If Ella caused misfortune to others, it would be even more my fault, because out of jealousy for her innocence and beauty, I must have set up a trap behind her back. But now I have lost everything, and Ella is still the rotten person she has always been. No one framed her deliberately, in fact, she has always been so vicious. Vaughn stared at Ella being escorted away by the police, suddenly covered his face and laughed wildly, tears streaming down his fingers. The laughter gradually became louder and louder, but eventually turned into a whimpering cry. Mrs. Grace was frightened and quickly stepped forward to help him. Vaughn pushed her hand away and ran away. 7. I watched as Ella screamed and was shoved into the police car. Intentional injury, incitement to crime, framing defamation, hiring thugs to beat people up. Because she was already 17 years old, the nature of her actions was particularly bad, and the matter was very serious. Ella was definitely going to jail for a few years, and no one could help her. My arm was diagnosed with a minor fracture, classified as a level 2 minor injury. If I wanted to pursue charges, the Vaughn family would have to pay me at least $200,000. Mrs. Grace offered me $1 million, on the condition that I write a letter of understanding and voluntarily not pursue Ella's criminal responsibility. $1 million. I could pay $1 million myself, as long as Ella could go to jail. It's always more satisfying to see the guilty punished than to see them escape legal sanctions. After rejecting her, Mrs. Grace's face turned ugly. She said, Fiona, how could you become like this? Auntie is very disappointed in you. I sneered, as if anyone cares. I know Mrs. Grace's character very well. After losing face like this, she will definitely give me a lesson. Sure enough, the homeroom teacher called the next day, telling me that my poverty relief subsidy had been stopped, and that I had to pay the tuition for my senior year in advance, and asked me to bring the money when I started school. See, Mrs. Grace is really a businesswoman. She knows exactly where my weakness lies. The tuition for a year at the school is $5,000, and my scholarship plus the money I earned from part-time jobs during winter and summer vacations was just enough. Now that the high school scholarship hasn't come down yet, where can I find $5,000 as a high school student? And without the monthly subsidy, I'll soon be unable to even afford food. Mrs. Grace's goal is very simple. She just wants to force me to submit. But she really underestimated me. $5,000 might drive a poor student with no survival skills to despair. But for a programmer with solid theoretical knowledge and rich practical experience, it's not a problem at all. In my previous life, I started from scratch and single-handedly turned Vaughn's declining company into a top-notch technology company in the industry. Moreover, with the booming IT industry now and a 20-year development plan in hand, it would be a waste of a golden opportunity not to do something. The morning sun shone on me at 8 or 9 o'clock, and I took a deep breath, feeling the vastness of the sky and the freedom. A long-lost sense of pride surged in my heart. 8. I took a month of sick leave for myself. Without a computer, I rented a private room in an internet cafe downstairs. I spent a whole week figuring out 3 startup formulas. On the 8th day, I took a U-Disk and went alone to an old building in the startup village that looked like it was about to collapse. Inside lived a man named Yuri, who had a messy beard and hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in days. He looked even more shabby than the dilapidated building. But I knew in my heart that one day everyone who used Chinese to surf the internet would remember this name, because the search engine he developed was specifically designed for Chinese habits. And everyone who used it said it was the best search tool they had ever used. But due to difficulties in a key technical link, this software was launched 1 year later than its foreign counterparts, which not only lost its leading position in the market, but also its user base has never caught up. What's worse, some people always look down on its goodness, constantly imitating and even plagiarizing it. Aren't you still missing 5 startup formulas? I sat opposite Yuri, putting on a confident look and placing the U-Disk on the table. Now there are 3 here. If you can agree to my conditions, I can give you the remaining 2. 9. Tristan. After confirming that I wasn't joking, Yuri turned around and shouted outside. A cheerful, chubby man like a Mithra Buddha rushed in. What's up, Yuri? Yuri handed him the U-Disk. Try installing it. No way, are you really going to do this? This girl isn't even an adult yet. Are you really going to take such a gamble? The fat man was glared at by both me and Yuri, and he grumbled as he walked out of the room with the U-Disk. 10 minutes later, he ran back in excitedly, his face flushed. It's done. Yuri, it's done. Local deployment now only takes 8 minutes. Ha 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 ha. It's a success. The fat man pulled Yuri, who was sitting in the chair, and jumped around the room. Yuri looked back at me as if he had seen a ghost. How about cross-platform? Everything is normal, Windows, Linux, and macOS can run smoothly. At this rate, we can hold a press conference in 3 months, ha ha ha. 3 months is too slow. I, who hadn't had breakfast to save money, was sitting in a chair eating the cream bread Yuri gave me. Thinking about the search engine that later overshadowed Yuri for a lifetime seemed to have been launched 3 months later, I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. If possible, try to hold a press conference within 2 months. Draw a big pie first, and the details can be perfected later. Seizing the opportunity is the most critical thing. I swallowed the bread in my mouth and added, if you need more manpower, I can help. Hearing this, the fat man immediately beamed. Little sister, with your words, I'm relieved. Do whatever you want, brother will listen to you. But Yuri remained rational. He pushed the fat man aside, and his expression became serious. You haven't mentioned your conditions yet. I slowly extended a hand. 500,000? The fat man guessed. I shook my head. 5 million? 50 million? Still shaking my head. Could it be 500 million? The fat man looked to Yuri for help. Yuri nodded in agreement, looking equally anxious. If it's 500 million, it's not completely impossible after the software is released, but it's definitely impossible now. What? Are these 2 people crazy? 5,000. I said the amount expressionlessly, maintaining a cold demeanor, and looked down at them both. Cash. Settle it quickly. I need to pay my tuition. 10. Yuri transferred $5,000 to me. After learning about my family's situation, he took me to the bank to open a new savings account, deposited the money, and then took out $15,000 in cash and handed it to me. The neighborhood where I lived was crowded and full of people, and Yuri thought it was too dangerous for a young person like me to take a taxi back home with so much money, so he decided to drive me home himself. When his conspicuous red Ferrari stopped outside the alley in front of my house, the whole neighborhood was in an uproar. Fiona, who's that? Harper, my landlord, an old lady, moved a small stool and sat at the door to sunbathe, her bright eyes constantly scanning me and Yuri. He's my second uncle. He's passing by on a business trip and came to see me specially. I answered casually and naturally stuffed the discounted eggs in my hand into Yuri's hands. Yuri took over the act accurately and started distributing eggs to the neighbors. I heard from the school teacher that my niece was injured at school, and I happened to be nearby, so I came to take a look. I bought some things for everyone. It's not worth much, and thank you all for taking care of our child. Holding a bag of eggs, Mrs. Harper immediately stopped doubting, but she still asked unwillingly. It seems that your second uncle is quite well off. He even drives such a good car when he's out on business? Oh, that's my boss's car. I'm just a driver. Yuri replied easily. Second uncle, hurry up. Put your things away and go back quickly. You still have to rush back to your boss later. As he spoke, he took 2 boxes of milk, a bag of vegetables, and a large gift bag full of snacks from the trunk of the car. The fat kid wearing only a vest and shorts on the packaging looked very festive, as if it were a holiday, making people feel happy involuntarily. The crowd, who had been expecting to hear some gossip, dispersed one by one, bored when they saw that there was nothing interesting to watch. When everyone left, Yuri looked at me with a smirk. Are you really my second uncle? What do you want me to do? I said calmly. What other relationship do you think is suitable between us? A fallen high school student and a wealthy sponsor? If this gets out, I don't want to be laughed at as dinner table talk. That's true, so you might as well call me second uncle. Yuri nodded and ruffled my hair, making it as messy as his. Just when I was about to fight back, he quickly withdrew his hand and ran out. Second uncle is leaving now, be careful at home. Get lost. 11. Yuri couldn't leave smoothly. As soon as he opened the door, a grimy figure popped out from somewhere, grabbed his collar, and almost pulled him to the ground. Although Yuri looked like a nerd, he was at least a strong young man, over 6 feet tall. He kicked the man 2 meters away. Who are you? The man rolled on the ground before getting up. I saw his face clearly. It was Vaughn. Vaughn clearly didn't expect anyone else to be here, and he frowned and asked me, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Hearing him mention my name, Yuri turned to me and asked, "Do you two know each other?" In this old residential area, people live so close together that neighbors can hear any noise. At this moment, a group of onlookers had gathered around, whispering about me and Vaughn, which made me quite annoyed. He's an acquaintance, his name is Vaughn. His sister is a classmate who has had a conflict with me. She's definitely here to cause trouble. I couldn't tell Yuri everything about our past lives, so I just said a few unimportant things. Hearing this, Yuri nodded slightly and pulled me behind him. For a moment, Vaughn was stunned, and then when he found my hand pulling on Yuri's clothes, he became furious. "Fiona, who is this guy?" I retorted impatiently. "What does it have to do with you?" "Of course it matters. I'm your..." Vaughn paused and his eyes gradually became moist. I looked at him coldly, calculating in my mind, if this guy dares to utter any disgusting words like husband or wife, I'll send him to the hospital on the grounds of mental instability. I have to accuse him of disrespecting me too. Now he's making a big fuss at my doorstep like this, as if I've been wronging someone behind his back. Anyone who sees it will think there's something between us. Isn't this ruining my reputation? I immediately stood in front of Yuri. This matter shouldn't involve other people. What if Vaughn loses his temper and hurts Yuri? Seeing this situation, Vaughn was furious, as if he wanted to grab me directly. Fortunately, Yuri was faster. He dodged to the side and avoided Vaughn's outstretched hand, then pushed him back. You asked me who I am just now. Yuri raised his chin and said proudly, I'm Fiona's big brother. 12. All right. Fine. I quietly moved to the side, making Yuri the center of attention. What's going on here, kid? Your sister beat up our Fiona so badly at school. And we haven't even bothered you. Yet you come to my door to cause trouble? No, this is between me and Fiona. Let her come out. Vaughn was so angry he couldn't speak. He pointed at me and shouted, No problem. Fiona, come out and let everyone see. Yuri pulled my arm that was still in a cast and showed it to everyone excitedly. Look, see what they've done to our child. Me. I realized that Yuri seemed to enjoy the excitement. More and more people gathered around. Oh my, she's even in a cast. She must have a fracture. Really, at such a young age, she's so violent. How was she raised? You're right. If she had any manners, she wouldn't have hit her own sister. And her brother wouldn't have come to our door to cause trouble. This kid is too bold. He even dared to bully people in our village. I recognize his school uniform. He's a student of CC Experimental High School. Let's go to the school to report him tomorrow. Yes, let's go together. Vaughn's face turned pale and then white, and finally he stared at Yuri viciously and said, I don't believe it. Fiona is an orphan. Where did she get a second uncle? 13. What do you mean by that? I feigned anger and sneered. I'm an orphan. Does that mean everyone in my family has to be an orphan? Vaughn opened his mouth but said nothing, his face turning red. In fact, I didn't have a second uncle at all. My parents and I had no other living relatives. So after they died, I couldn't even find a guardian. This was one of the reasons why the Vaughn family could manipulate me so easily in my previous life. I knew all this, and the reborn Vaughn knew it too. But at this moment, he had absolutely no reason to know these things. Therefore, even though he knew a lot of inside information, he couldn't say a word. Yuri next to me kept helping me. That's right. Even people who beg under the bridge have 3 relatives. Why can't I have a second uncle? Can't you think positively? Believe it or not, what does it have to do with us? Who asked for your opinion? Oh, I understand. Looking at your appearance, your family tree probably isn't thick either. Maybe you really don't know what a second uncle is. Why don't you do this? I'll give you $2. You go to the arcade on the corner and try again before arguing with me. Hearing him say that, I couldn't help but laugh. Yuri is really good at provoking people. At least, Vaughn was completely enraged by him now. Seeing me laugh, he became even angrier and looked at me with red eyes. Fiona, my mother sponsored your education. She has been kind to you. How can you so easily help an outsider to squeeze me out? I smiled. Can't take it anymore? Vaughn, when I was being treated unfairly, you never stood up for me once. Your sister bullied me. Your mother put pressure on me. We both knew that this marriage was a torture for both of us. But you knew you were powerless. So you could only rely on me to hold up the face of the Vaughn family. You refused to divorce. And you felt so wrong that you did your best to humiliate me. My life was a nightmare. My talent became a burden. And my pain was insignificant. Now it's your turn to experience it. Vaughn's eyes began to moisten, and he asked me in a low voice, Fiona, are you taking revenge on me? If that's the case, then go away. Your mother did sponsor my studies. It was her help to me. But I didn't even ask for compensation because my sister injured my hand. Isn't that enough to repay her kindness? I took out the 13,000 yuan in cash that I had prepared from the room. Mrs. Grace has sponsored my tuition for 3 years plus 1,000 yuan in financial aid every year. And now I have it all here. I will return it all to you. From now on, I no longer owe you anything. Don't appear in front of me again, Vaughn. 14. After resting for a few days, and finally finishing the remaining 2 guides for Yuri, I returned to school. During this time, I went to the hospital to change my cast twice. The doctor said my arm was recovering well, as long as I took good care of it, and didn't lift heavy things for 6 months. There shouldn't be any major problems in the future. Ella was still in school. This was not surprising, as the case had not been closed yet and Mrs. Grace must have bailed her out. However, Vaughn's seat was empty. When I entered the class, the noisy classroom suddenly fell silent for a second. Ella was chatting intimately with a few girls. And when she saw me enter, she deliberately raised her voice. My brother saw Fiona getting out of a car with a man he didn't know. Is that true? Really, Fiona is so outrageous. Who would have thought that Fiona, who has such good grades, would have such a messy private life? Yes, it's really disgusting. Ella's voice was loud enough for almost the whole class to hear. Immediately, all kinds of strange eyes were cast on me. I could hear the whispers around me. Ella glanced at me triumphantly, then asked loudly, Fiona, is that true? I rolled my eyes impatiently. Turning around, I saw the homeroom teacher standing behind me, his face already ashen. Teacher, what do you think? The homeroom teacher glared at the troublemaker Ella and said sternly, Ella, this is a place for studying. If you don't want to study, get out. Ella's face turned pale. Most of the students knew that Ella was the adopted daughter of the school board member. And when they saw that the homeroom teacher, who usually let her do whatever she wanted, was so strict with her, they were immediately in an uproar. I walked back to my seat easily and put down my backpack. My desk mate and the students in front of me helped me organize the pile of test papers on my desk because my hand was inconvenient. My desk mate whispered to me, Fiona, be careful. Ella is glaring at you. I looked up and sure enough, Ella was staring at me with hatred. I picked up the water cup on the desk and made a toast gesture to her. I mouthed the words to her. Does the drink taste good? It probably didn't taste very good, because Ella spit it out afterwards. 15. Ella vomited violently in class. The teacher had to interrupt the lesson, found 2 students to take her to the infirmary, and then called Mrs. Grace in front of the whole class. However, Mrs. Grace was very busy, and the call was transferred to her secretary. Ella stayed in the infirmary all day, and no one came to see her until school was over. The stepbrother and stepmother who used to be so attentive to her and would rush to her side for even the slightest thing seemed to have disappeared overnight. Naturally, the classmates were discussing the matter. I was drinking water and couldn't help but sneer. From all indications, Mrs. Grace was quickly losing patience with her troublesome adopted daughter, Ella. After all, in the principal's office that day, Vaughn and Ella had embraced each other in public without any concealment. Anyone with eyes could see that their relationship went beyond that of normal siblings. Mrs. Grace valued Vaughn very much and would never let her darling bear the stigma of incest, even if they were not related by blood. But those who didn't know the situation couldn't think that much. They would only think that Ella had fallen out of favor. I took the registration form for the provincial math competition from the homeroom teacher and saw the girls who had been gossiping with Ella gathered at the back door, talking in low voices. So, Ella really has something going on with Vaughn? Of course it's true. Otherwise, why would any girl who gets a little too close to Vaughn be bullied by her? The leading girl, wearing bright lipstick, looked around, making sure Ella wasn't in the classroom, and then said excitedly, You know what? I heard from my relative that Ella is going to jail. What? Why? The girls around her exclaimed, eager to learn more. Didn't Ella beat up Fiona? Fiona called the police and Mrs. Grace, the school board, also found out about her affair with her brother. She's been so arrogant at school, all because she had her mother backing her up. Now that her mother doesn't care about her anymore, the police have found out that she's done a lot of bad things. She lowered her voice and said mysteriously, Do you remember Isabella from class for who almost jumped off the building last year? She tried to commit suicide because Ella had someone do that to her. My relative works in the police station, and she said that Ella can't escape this time. Even the juvenile protection law won't help her. You guys are talking nonsense. Ella screamed as she entered the classroom and slapped the girl. The girl was stunned and covered her face, accusing Ella incredulously. Why did you hit me? Seeing this, the others also helped. That's right. You did something wrong, and you don't let others say anything? Ella, you're too much. You really think you're a big shot? Don't even look at what you are. A group of girls chattered and attacked Ella, and she stood there trembling with anger. but couldn't say anything. She pounced forward to fight back, but she was outnumbered and was soon grabbed by the hair and dragged to the girls' bathroom by the group of girls. Along the way, everyone was laughing at her. No one came to her aid. I turned my head indifferently and returned to my seat. The Wolf King on the grassland, once injured, will immediately be surrounded and attacked by his former subordinates. Having lost Mrs. Grace's protection, Ella was nothing, and naturally became the new target of the wolf pack she had raised. As the saying goes, you reap what you sow. 16. After a couple of weeks, I went to the hospital to have my right arm cast removed. 5 days after the cast was removed, I represented the school in the city selection for the provincial competition and won first place without any suspense. After the provincial competition, I also attended the launch of the new search engine with the trophy. The new search engine developed by Yuri was still called No, just like in my previous life. To know is to know, and to not know is to not know. Yuri had a fresh haircut and used some hair gel to fix his hair. He looked a little nervous holding the microphone on the stage, but his eyes were full of enthusiasm. I hope everyone can maintain such a pragmatic attitude and move forward step by step. The audience immediately burst into applause. My seat was in the front row, with a nameplate of a technical consultant on the table. This era still favored young female geniuses, so I also became a hot spot for reporters. Soon, the story between me and the Vaughn family was dug up, including the lawsuit with Ella that had never been brought to court due to Grace's manipulation. The identity of the provincial champion in the math competition, coupled with my experience of a former struggling student confronting my sponsor, made many people interested. Coupled with the complex family feuds and emotional entanglements that people love to watch, there was more and more talk about me. Incidentally, the No search engine also received a lot of attention as a result. I didn't really care. After all, Yuri had given me a portion of the equity, and such high exposure actually brought me a lot of benefits. This kind of free promotion was naturally good. But Yuri didn't think so. Especially on the topic of adolescent growth, he insisted on his own point of view, like an old father. He even specially applied to be my temporary guardian, canceling all my public interviews and invitations, and even personally accompanied me to court to resolve the case with Ella, looking like a hen protecting its chicks. The fat man and I both felt that Yuri might have become fond of being a patriarch, but Yuri didn't think so. 17. In fact, Mrs. Grace didn't even come to court. Reborn Vaughn anticipated everything in advance. He persuaded Mrs. Grace to buy a large amount of stock in a company that had developed a search engine earlier than Yuri in the previous life, almost draining all of the company's liquid funds. Now that this foreign company had been preempted by No and lost its best opportunity to seize the market, the stock price plummeted, becoming almost worthless. Mrs. Grace was on the verge of bankruptcy herself, and she didn't have the energy to take care of her adopted daughter. As a result, Ella didn't even have the money to hire a lawyer, and the court kindly helped her find one. Ella was eventually sentenced to 6 years in prison because the case had been widely discussed. Her behavior had a particularly bad impact, and this sentence was almost the maximum she could accept. The moment the judge's gavel fell, the girl who had been sitting quietly beside me took off her hat and mask and burst into tears, hugging me. Looking at Isabella, who was now so thin and frail, I gently patted her back and looked up into the distance. A gray-white sparrow perched on the vent on the ceiling, cocked its head at us, and then flapped its wings and flew away. It was a rare good day in this cold winter.